I am so excited for this conversation. I'm sitting here with a new friend, both to myself and to the SALT community. Welcome, Rick Dempsey. Thank you for being here, my friend.
Thanks for inviting me.
So you spent 35 years at Disney.
I did.
Your role at the peak of it was Senior Vice President of Character Development. Is that right?
Character Voices.
Character Voices.
Domestic and international.
Yeah, yes. And you've got a lot in that. You're now working kind of in your own world. Mm-hmm. You've started your own company, and you're doing a lot with The Chosen.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to your time at Disney,
okay.
and maybe even still a little bit of Chosen, but animation specifically.
Okay.
I think many people in our audience may be surprised to hear kind of the workflow of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought the animation gets done, and then you get the voice to kind of come on top, and you were like, no, that's not happening. Walk us through what that process is like.
Yeah, you actually record the voices first, which is really interesting. People don't realize that, but it's the only way that an actor can really get all the ad-lib nuances that they want to do. Think of Robin Williams as the genie, for example, in Aladdin. Yeah. So much of what Robin did was improv. So,
and that's who he is, too. So,
of course, and that's why you're hiring Robin Williams, right? So he's going off the page all the time. You've got a script, but then you let him riff. And the only way you could capture those riffs is once you edit it all together is then you start the animation process, and you can bring all that personality, all the improvisational moments to the animation after you have the soundtrack base of what's been recorded.
But so much of like a scene is to know what's happening in that scene, what's around that scene, who else is in that scene. How do you give those actors that context?
Yeah, that's the job of the director, to ensure they understand the context of what's happening in the script. And in animation, they bring in these giant storyboards. They are literal boards. They're 4 feet by 8 feet, massive, and it's just a cork board with all the artist storyboard images with the dialogue underneath kind of written. It's just like a giant comic book.
Yeah.
Like these giant comic books that they bring into the studio, and the talent watches the whole thing, and the directors take them.
Are they moving these as they get through the script, or is it kind of like per line or per scene?
Per scene.
Okay.
Yeah, and they'll come in and they'll move them, but they're massive, because it's the artist's original work. They don't condense it to a comic book size.
Yeah.
And that's how they get a feel for the scene as to what's going on. And they start creating and developing the idea of the character in the early stages with what they see in these storyboards.
I know you know Andy Irwin, and we were talking the other day, he and I, and he was telling me about a scene, and I can only imagine where like he knew that the actor, I think it was Dennis Quaid, came in and basically leveled up Bart Millard's character. And he just talked about the chemistry that happens between characters and actors when they get to work together. In animation, how does that work? Are they together?
Well, usually not. Usually we record them one at a time. So you'll have a dummy reader reading the other character's lines.
And are they in some sort of inflection so you can kind of get some energy?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Usually the person reading the lines is familiar with what the other actor has done. But if they're the first ones, you're just kind of making it up as you go. Yeah. One thing with like Buzz and Woody, perfect partnership combo.
They need to be together. There needs
Tom
to be
and Tim
chemistry.
would I think they would kind of close out their recordings by doing a lot of the lines over again together. Going back and forth because they could feed off each other.
Yeah.
And that was a really great thing to, for the two of them to be able to leverage each other to kind of not really one up each other, but to like you said, to level up.
I think of an Elsa and an Anna. They have to have chemistry. Did they ever do any of those lines in the same room? Or is that just complex from a technical standpoint?
No, it's talent scheduling, and it's just easier to because you've got your animators for Anna, you got your animators for Elsa. They're focused on Elsa. The other ones are focused on Anna, and they just bring it all together. So a lot of it's editorial. I'm sure there were times when both Idina and Kristen were there at the same time.
But not the norm. Not the norm. Exception.
No.
That's
Every time I recorded them, it was always one at a time.
That's amazing. So cool. You have spent so much of your career thinking about tone of voice and the way in which you inflect. For many in our audience, in our community, they're helping coach their pastors. They may be helping coach on-air talent or on-screen talent. They may be helping coach hosts of a service. How do you help people understand the power of tone, or how do you help people understand the inflection that they bring?
Well, when I spoke in the big session, I mentioned my love for music, and I was a musician. And I listened to the human voice musically, and I think that's really the only way you can do it. It's the only way you can really express it. We talk about, take the characters in Winnie the Pooh. Okay, the voice of Winnie the Pooh is kind of like a violin. It can be soothing, but it's scratchy, right? Eeyore is like an oboe. right?
Yeah.
Tigger is like an electric guitar in your face, whang, high energy. Rabbit, staccato, raspy, kind of like a saxophone.
Yeah, or like a drum, like
yeah. So I kind of look at even casting. We look to cast the ensemble kind of in a musical style, and I think to your point is even within the church there needs to be a dynamic. In the same way that a good worship band's very different than a bad worship band, right? I think someone just doing announcements brings a certain energy, a certain meter to the score that either creates energy, creates excitement, even with their pitch, with their tempo, which is their excitement. That I think we need to. We need to bring that to the audience in a way that they feel it, they resonate with it, and I think it's key in church. If you get some Eeyore in there, right, just kind of going through the thing, looking at their notes, and I know it happens. And
you can't make a movie with just Eeyore.
You can't make a movie with just
so
Eeyore.
Good.
Yeah.
A lot of the church staff that I get a chance to talk to, they're not necessarily the senior pastor. And we started talking a little bit earlier of like, you're not the director on a film. You were over character voices and coaching those. Talk about that relationship you had and kind of where, if their vision, how you had to come alongside and support them. How do you kind of, maybe if you have a conflicting vision with sort of the leader of that project, how do you navigate that? What does that look like? I
wasn't allowed to have a conflicting vision with the director of the
film.
You
had to come alongside.
Yeah, absolutely. So they have a vision for that character that they want to create for this movie. It was really my job to ensure brand consistency and integrity with that story. Walt Disney Company was so big that we needed to ensure wherever Ariel, the Little Mermaid, or Sebastian the Crab, or Mufasa and Simba showed up, that they were consistent with the story that the original storyteller and director told.
Yeah.
So that was important to the company. It's the only way that we build franchises.
Yes.
They need to be consistent. Even you look at whether it be Marvel or Lucasfilm, those characters need to be consistent with who they are. And so it was really never my responsibility to cast that original vision. It was the original animation director's vision as to how those characters came out. I kind of took the ball from them and ran with it for everything else. I call it kind of the ancillary stuff.
Was there ever a time you kind of had a vision for a character or how something should sound that maybe wasn't in alignment with what the director had? And was there any chance for you to sort of help, influence or persuade or say, hey, maybe there's a different option here?
Maybe at times, never really in the films themselves. Again, that wasn't my call to make.
Yeah.
We could give some input.
Or let me even say it this way. You worked with a Robin Williams. You just talked about that. He is a loose cannon. He's going to kind of do what Robin does, and you hire him for that.
Right.
Were there ever times you had to really coach him to go, hey, Robin, I love that, but this is what we need to get in this scene? Or is that the director's job in that moment?
Yeah, no. Well, when I directed Robin, it was for ancillary stuff, and Robin he just gives you a bunch of stuff, and then it's all on the editor. It's on the editor to figure out what's usable between some of the inappropriate language and some of the things, innuendo that he may throw in that you have to cut out.
Yeah.
But it makes it really, really fun. I'd rather have too much than not enough.
Yeah.
And there were times when Tim Allen, for example, Buzz Lightyear. Directed him probably 100 sessions. In fact, I told Tim just before I retired, I said, "Hey Tim, people ask me who my favorite talent is to direct, and I think you're it." He goes, "Well, it better be. We've done this like 100 times, But Tim sometimes, I just remember one time he just read a line, and I go, "That sounded more like William Shatner than it did Buzz Lightyear," and he laughed so hard. And it's like sometimes you just got to boost them back up. Like they kind of forget what they're doing, why they're there.
They get into a routine.
Yeah,
100 of these things.
Yeah, and it goes back to that musicality of it. Like, who is Buzz Lightyear? Where's he at? Where's his pitch at? What's his rhythm? And I'm listening for all that stuff, and sometimes they may abandon that for just a second, and you got to rein them back in.
Yeah. You spent 35 years, you transitioned off, which I can't imagine what that was like. You talked a little bit about that in your session of kind of transitioning and kind of knowing that the Lord was calling you elsewhere. I'm just curious, for someone listening, how did you end your time there well? I mean, 35 years, that's not just something you go, here's my 2 weeks, I'm done. Walk through that process. How did you honor Disney on your way out, and how do you end that season well?
Yeah, I think after 35 years and at the the level I had reached, I had a lot of respect for the company. They had respect for me.
Yeah.
There was no way I could just quit over some of the squabbles that I had or some of the convictions I had where the company was at. I could only do that graciously.
Yeah.
And I think in the same way that we're shown grace daily from our Savior, I needed to be gracious in that moment. The department to this day continues and it carries on with someone who's doing a different job than the way that I did it, but they're completely qualified and good at what they do. I had a different approach, and as I left, they were really respectful. When I put in my announcement, they asked me to stay for 2 more years.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that works. And they were doing it to
So
honor me.
You gave a 2-year notice, not a 2-week
Yeah,
notice.
it was a 2-year notice.
Yeah.
And they did that to honor me. There were, stock options and things like that.
But there was also probably stories in the works that you kind of wanted to see through, or projects that you were working on.
Yeah. We were working on a couple things, and so they said, well, "Can you stick it out for 2 more years?" It turns out the opportunity with The Chosen came up, and I only made it 1 year.
Okay.
And they were okay with it. I think they were respectful enough. I can't say enough positive things about the company.
Yeah.
In fact, I would leave it at that. I had a great run.
Yeah.
And so I'm just super grateful for the opportunity that I had while there. And when things weren't going the way that I wanted them to go, then it was time to leave.
Before we get to The Chosen, which I want to talk about as well, one of the things that I think you said to me early on in a conversation when we met was you talked about how you wear Jesus on your sleeve. You did it very boldly through all your years at Disney, that no one ever had to question that Rick Dempsey was a Jesus-believing Christian.
Right.
Talk about that. You have something that you talk about, like your brand. And it sounds like even as you left, you were very conscious of, if I've worn Jesus on my sleeve, I can't just give 2 weeks because of some convictions. I've got to do this in love, and I've got to do this with grace. So talk a little bit about that brand thing you talked about.
Yeah, it's, I believe, first of all, we need to have brand identity, which is in Jesus. I did get some advice from another believer. He said, don't wear Christ on your sleeves, just get by with all the politics. And I don't think he meant what he said, because I was like, kind of cocked my head and going, well, that's just the opposite. I want to wear Christ on my sleeve. I want everybody to know I'm a believer. He was probably saying, don't use your time in this company to evangelize everybody, in every office.
Don't let that be the lead story.
Yes, exactly. I'll take anybody out to dinner that
night. Be forefront, but do the work first.
Exactly, Get the job done.
Yeah.
Keep the eye on the ball. But it was important that I was there for people when they wanted to talk about faith. So I did try to make people aware. I remember talking to the one of the heads of development who ultimately became the president of animation. He had weird artwork in his office. And I just asked him about it and used that as an opportunity just to share the gospel with him. I didn't know how I would respond to that, but it turns out that in the future days, he was adamant that I attended every meeting that the company had creatively when it came to a moral decision. So, and he wasn't a believer at all. In fact, he lived a life that was very much like an unbeliever, and but he was adamant that I had a voice because he respected that.
Yeah.
So, I think that kind of trickled up, whether that be Bob Iger, the head of the studio, or whatever, the chairman of the studio, knew that I was a believer. And so when these things came up, certainly like Chronicles of Narnia, we had a faith and family task force, and we would sit there and talk about how we could continue to create films that were still appealing to the faith and family community, because we didn't want to alienate them after Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Right.
So we had to sustain that brand identity with them and have brand integrity. We weren't going to do a one-off film and then turn our backs on the faith and family community. Right. So I felt kind of responsible to kind of maintain the brand integrity.
That's neat. That's so cool. All right, so now you're working with The Chosen. Talk a little bit about kind of the work you're doing with them and how that story came to be.
Yeah, super exciting. I shared it in the main seminar. But boy, I had announced my retirement, went off to – no, actually, I had not announced my retirement. I was praying about it. Went off to Hawaii, got a shave ice, sat on a bench. A guy showed up that I had no idea, some complete stranger. We just struck up a conversation and found out that he was a believer. And I shared, some of my highs and lows at Disney, and he said, let's stay in touch. So it was that guy I met over shave ice. He was in a meeting with the team at Come and See, which is the founding organization that owns The Chosen, and they bought the IP and they didn't know how to get it out around the world. And this guy was sitting in that meeting and he said, I know a guy.
So he was part of what the Greens, Hobby Lobby, had kind of funded Come and See Foundation. This guy that you met in Hawaii just happened to later be on that team.
He's actually he's connected with the parachurch ministry. They're doing great work.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean it was very, very random.
Yeah,
and I had done all the international voices for Disney as well. We didn't talk about that, but as a result of that, this guy knew that I had the inroads into that part of the world. A lot of people don't know how to adapt a script and translate it and dub it. So they just said, we don't know how to do this. And he says, I know a guy. I had a shave ice with him in Hawaii. So that's how it all came about. And that was after I had already announced my retirement.
Isn't it amazing how the Lord works, that all that comes and you took a leap of faith.
Yeah.
You jumped off without a parachute, like you said, and then the Lord says, I got you.
Yep.
I know exactly. And I think there's sometimes encouragement there of like trust that the Lord's got you.
Totally.
Whatever that is, whether it's leaving or not. I mean, it's, obviously for your story that's leaving, but take a risk. Can you show the Lord, I want to trust you and place myself in a place where I'm so dependent and necessary to have you intervene.
Yeah.
What a great place to find
yourself.
yourself.
It was really God's story. I mean, there's no way you could. I was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with not a care in the world other than thinking I was going to leave Disney to meet a guy who just, at 11:30, before lunch, I had the shave ice. So it's just God's timing of it all. It's truly amazing.
It's cool. And I want to talk about The Chosen in this brief time we have left. Mm-hmm. You and I were talking about this, that like The Chosen's done something pretty crazy in the entertainment space. It's done something pretty crazy in the faith space. Yeah. Talk about that. What has that unlocked? What's changing in the atmosphere of entertainment industry, Hollywood, et cetera, because of the success of The Chosen?
It's really cool, isn't it? I think we're opening up a lot of eyes.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing Christian entertainment, which we have fallen behind a little bit in Christian entertainment. And I think The Chosen and other things like what the Irwin brothers are doing are bringing back the high quality, story-driven entertainment that we need by Christian filmmakers. Yeah. I think that's incredible. And I think Dallas is doing just a phenomenal job. Dallas Jenkins is doing a phenomenal job with The Chosen in the way that it's written and the way that it's directed. And the quality of that show has shown Hollywood that a quality Christian faith-based show can actually work.
Yeah.
I think if you would have said 5 years ago before The Chosen first came out, people would have said, it'll never fly. I think that was kind of the attitude when they shot that first episode. Yeah, this will be good for a couple episodes. But boy, we've proven that quality will out.
Quality will. And I think you and I were talking early, way back about the idea that 10 years ago, there were way more ideas than there were resources to pull off some of these ideas in Christian entertainment. And now that's kind of flipping, right?
It is.
Studios, Lionsgate is putting hundreds of millions of dollars into faith-based films.
Yeah.
You've got the Come and See Foundation that's funding this. I mean, you've got, just like back in the Renaissance era, you've got these wealthy families that are trying to help pour into faith-based art to then help bring people back to the church. And that's this beautiful cycle. Do you want to talk at all about that? And
I think that the main thing to understand is the mentality. As soon as you go into a business mentality of, I got to make a certain amount of return on my investment. What I like about Mark Green, his attitude is just, no, my return on investment is souls.
Yeah.
As a believer, we're going to use our resources because if I'm doing a version of The Chosen in Tigrinya, I'm telling you, there's not going to be a commercial return on the investment, right?
Yeah.
But hopefully we're going to reach people, the lost, for Christ. And that's Mart's vision in translation, is to get this out to 1 billion people.
So
we hopefully get to 2 billion by 2033. I can't believe that's coming up. And we're hoping to reach billions of people with this show. And again, that's not a financial return on investment.
Totally. But you were able to almost use the Western North American return on investment cash-wise to help fund the global soul
you got it.
Return on investment.
That's exactly it, yeah. So that's pretty cool. So you can see it from a commercial producer perspective that the faith community is there. People want to see these types of films, but the quality's got to be there. They'll reject it if the quality's not there.
100%.
We're in competition with the Disneys.
Excellence is kind of like the world's language. Like if it's not there, you're not going to be able to speak it. All right, last question for you. You work in the church, or you don't work in the church, but you're very involved in your church, very plugged in. A lot of our community work day in and day out in the church. I've always said that I think that art is the language of the invisible. I think it can transcend words, pastors' moments, spoken words, even written words, sometimes even though those are creative works. What would you leave this community with in just encouraging them how story and art could help propel the gospel and maybe more through the local church?
Well, first of all, we're such a media-saturated society now that people are getting their stories from media. Books are one thing. I know people still read books, but all our youth are they're holding their phones and they're looking at media on their phones. What a great opportunity to use that as an evangelical tool. To not cram the gospel down anybody's throat. They'll just turn it off if you do that. But to tell great stories of high quality that are inventive, that are creative, that will attract people, and hopefully they'll get the message. I work with a gentleman in the Middle East who is trying to reach people for Jesus, and they use art to get projects like The Chosen into the Middle East. They say their thing is WHAM, Why Art Matters.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a really interesting idea. It matters because you can't bring a Bible into the Middle East, but you can bring The Chosen. You can bring a show. Even if it's about Jesus, it's okay because it's an art piece. And we're seeing The Chosen get into places where we could never get a Bible, or a preacher would lose his head if he started preaching. And yet, we've got letters from guys in the Taliban who have been saved from watching The Chosen. It's unbelievable. So we're able to get in and expose people because of the stories that we're telling. Whether it would be with The Chosen or Christians in general, I think art has that effect on people.
Rick, I love having this conversation. I'm so grateful for the time that you've poured into this community. I love how bold you are with your faith and how you just want to help encourage other artists and creatives to tell great stories for the church. So thank you for being here, my friend.
It's my pleasure, man. Thank you so much.